When you're trying to build a process of resilience, one good idea to think about is something called dynamic capabilities. And essentially what that involves is you going through three processes. First of all, you are reaching out and seeking and looking to see what the environment looks like to sense opportunities and threats. The second part of it is around what they call seizing. In other words, once you've identified the threats and the opportunities, you go through a process of determining which ones you're going to focus on. And it may be as part of that you determine which ones to focus on when. So it may be about, I'll deal with that issue first, and then that issue, and then that issue. The third is about what's called reconfiguration. And what that is basically around is saying, I've got this set of issues. What resources do I have to deal with those issues? What do I have that I can use now? What are the new resources that I need in order to actually deal with this situation? And through those three processes, where often they go through what you can call feedback loops. It's not just sometimes it's not just linear. You can go through a range of processes time and again. Through going through those sensing, seizing and reconfiguration, you actually start to undertake learning about the actual issue itself and how you deal with it. And then that starts to build up both a resilient process, but also then delivers more resilient outcomes. In terms of building up those skills, which are around this idea of sensing, seizing, reconfiguring, then it's a combination of the ability to what's called effectuate, and that's around basically using the resources that you've got easily to hand, either because you've got them already or you can acquire them via your network. So networking is part of this, but also the ability to identify the point at which you need to get new resources and to go out and get those new resources to effectively cement the change into place. Often you find that people have got either one set of skills or the other, but having both of them at the same time is the real challenge often. Effectuation, sometimes it's called bricolage, but the basic point about it is your ability to use and reorganize your existing resources. That is a skill set which can often lead to people just using that skill set. So when they get to the point where they've got to look for new resources, that might be extra funding, it may be extra, let's say, teachers in the case of education, or additional technology, their processes aren't set up for that. They're kind of set up for always using existing resources. The key element here which builds that resilience into the process in the long term is understanding where you switch from that short to medium term learning and effectuating process where you're tweaking, you're trying things out using your existing resources, to deciding we're going to cement this new process into place, and we're going to get some new resources to do that. Well, the basics around it are the point about you've got the two elements. You've got complex and you've got system. So the system element is that you've got a range of, in this case, stakeholders who are part of the process of creating the education. The complexity is around the fact that they all interact together and they can create new and sometimes uncertain outcomes. And it's very difficult to model that because it's almost like it's organic in the sense of it grows in an organic way, the way that things do in nature, and that makes it much more difficult to, if you like, model the interdependencies and often the competitive relationships between different parts of the system. What that means is that you have these interrelationships where everything affects everything else. That then starts to create the complexity, and the complexity is what makes it potentially unpredictable, because depending on which organisations, for example, or stakeholders hold the resources and what their views are, they can determine which way the system works. So obviously in the case of an education system, then government is going to be a very powerful stakeholder because nothing else, it holds the majority of the financial resources that support education systems generally. So depending on what their philosophy is, that can determine the way that the actual educational complex system develops. On the other hand, you've obviously got educators themselves, you've got the deliverers of technology, and equally they can influence the system, both positively and negatively, depending on how they react to and react with what the other stakeholders do. I think in terms of moving forward, it's a good way of thinking about building resilience into an education system in the long run is to acknowledge that it's what is called in public management a wicked problem. And what that means is that it's a problem where the outcome itself is contested between the different stakeholder groups. So we think about education as this complex system where you've got different stakeholder groups. They are going to have different ideas about what the optimum solution is. Now that makes it a wicked problem, because if you want to get a solution that's workable, you've actually got to involve all the stakeholders in the discussion. And that is the first key part of it, is that you need to get the stakeholders together to discuss the issue and to come up jointly and properly jointly with the solution. Because if you can do that, you are much more likely to actually deliver that solution. Because you've got to remember that these different stakeholder groups have all got abilities to put obstacles in the way if they don't agree with the solution. So you have to build from both sides, of the bottom up and the top down. Clearly the government is going to have a key role to play here, but so are the educators, so are the students, so are the people that can deliver the technology, be that online technology, but also potentially, via much more traditional systems like the television. Into that mix as well, the other thing you need to recognize is the different abilities of user groups to access that technology. So part of this is about how easy is it for them to access online. So you've also got to recognize that as part of this complex system, education often overlaps with other parts of life, other parts of society. And in order to get certain user groups enthused, there is nothing wrong at all with getting, the people that they look upon as role models involved. This is certainly something that's happened in the United Kingdom, for example, when it comes to reading, where there are lots of famous celebrities that go on to reading short stories that then enthuse children to actually go and read. But they've also delivered this more and more when it came to mathematics in the current pandemic, where they got famous footballers and pop stars, etc., to actually be part of very short videos, would then enthuse the users to actually look at the materials that were there to help them. So this is a wicked problem. It requires a societal solution where you've got the different groups together to come up with that agreed, probably compromise, but agreed solution. And then to deliver that, but also to recognize you're going to need to come back in an ongoing discussion over time to build up support for the approach that's taken.